Hello and welcome everyone to this new lecture in the lecture series of the Cañada Blanch Center at the LSE. My name is Andreas Rodriguez Pose. I am a professor of economic geography, the Princesa de Asturias Chair in Spanish Studies, and the director of the center, Cañada Blanch at the LSE. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is gaining significant traction, which is the idea of a development trap, and that development trap specifically at the regional level. What is that? This is our regions that, in the case of Europe, have been performing in recent years worse than they did in the past, and they have been performing worse than their peers at the national level, but also across the whole of Europe. And this concept is increasingly becoming more discussed, with many parts of Europe having reviewed the concept, having considered how to implement that concept for economic development, and also the European Commission at the moment, with the big impulse that was the 9th Cohesion Report, trying to promote the idea that perhaps we need to focus not just on the least developed country and least developed regions of Europe, which in fact have received considerable amount of support and should continue to receive support, but also take into account the problems of areas of Europe that in the past very often have been motors of economic development, but are suffering from long and sometimes very long periods of stagnation. And today we're going to focus not just on the theory or the aggregate type of analysis, but we're going to focus on the specific cases across different countries in our continent. This is a workshop, a seminar, that has been put together by Professor Simona Iammarino, who is a professor of economics at the University of Cagliari, but a board member of the Cañada Blanch Center. And before I pass the floor to her, just one quick mention regarding housekeeping. Please keep your microphones muted while everyone's talking, and only please introduce if you're invited, or unmute yourself if you're invited to talk. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Simona Iammarino. Please, Simona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andres. There are sometimes some, problems with the audio. Let's hope that everything goes well. I wanted to welcome, first of all, to this workshop, everybody, and those that will look at this on YouTube later on. This is a fantastic opportunity to discuss the concept and measurement of the regional development trap in relation to the case studies, the regional case studies that were described in the report that we did and we published with the European Commission with the experts of these regions. 3 case studies out of 4 we didn't address in this workshop France, because there was a previous workshop before Christmas on France case. So we will have first Andreas Diemer, who is a postdoc researcher at the Swedish Institute for Social Research at Stockholm University, who will introduce briefly the concept, the measurement, in order to give the audience a reminder of what we're talking about, what the issues are. Then we have Spomenka Đurić, State Secretary in the Ministry of Regional Development and European Union Funds from the Republic of Croatia, that will talk about the experience of the Jadranska Hrvatska region, so Adriatic Croatia, and followed by Gianfranco Viesti, Professor of Applied Economics at the University of Bari Aldo Moro in Italy, who will expand on the Abruzzo region. And last but not least, we'll have Markus Grillitsch, Associate Professor in Economic Geography and Director of Circle at Lund University in Sweden, who will instead describe the situation of Sydsverige or South Sweden. So without taking other time, because it's very important to listen to the speaker, I will leave the floor to Andreas. Each speaker has 10-12 minutes for this presentation, and then will be a debate among the speakers, but also if any any of you who are attending wants to put a question or a comment in a chat, I will take care of that. Thank you very much, everybody. Andreas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simona. So let me just quickly share my screen. I do have a presentation. Can you all see my presentation, my slideshow? All right, excellent. Let me also start a timer, so I am sure to stay in the 12 minutes. Firstly, let me thank you, the Cañada Blanch Center, for hosting this event, and thank you, Simona, for organizing this. I know quite a bit of work went into it. So today I will be introducing the concept of the regional development trap and discuss a bit what it is and what it is as an indicator and its future potential as we see it. But before going into the nitty-gritty, I should also say this is based on joint work with Andreas, Simona, and Michael Storper. And also, given the time limits, I will refer sometimes to the paper for extra details. Just to introduce the idea and why we decided to look into this, the point of the patch we have here is that we observe a multi-speed regional Europe with distinct regional development clubs forming. And so just to illustrate here, we see that there are stark variations in growth rates across European regions, and that this is true across several different levels of initial development. So here, if you observe growth rates on the y-axis in the scatter plot, and sort of log GDP and levels on the x-axis. And so you'll also observe there's quite a bit of mass here at sort of relatively low levels of growth across different levels of development. And sort of the idea of developing this index is really how do we sort of identify these and how do we build an aggregate picture? And so this is how we develop the concept and the measurement associated with it. And so what is it? How do we define it? We define a regional development trap as a state of a region that faces significant structural challenges in regaining its previous economic dynamism or in improving the wealth of its residents. And this is evaluated in terms of, as Andreas earlier said, past performance of the region or prevailing national or European economic conditions. And so a few key conceptual features to highlight here, firstly, is that we adopt a broad definition of economic performance. Indeed, we focus on prosperity of residents, and we acknowledge the fact that when evaluating regional development, potential traps may not manifest itself only in terms of income growth, but also in other dimensions, such as, for instance, productivity or performance of labor markets. Secondly, we also really fully embrace this dynamic perspective because we acknowledge development as a complex process that can, take multiple types of trajectories. And so the way we think of this index is something we can measure yearly for the region, that enables us to trace out these development trajectories. And finally, we emphasize the regional focus here. As I said, we are not interested in trends that are common to the national or European scale, but we really want to identify trends that are specific to the region, above and beyond what we would have observed otherwise. There's, of course, a related literature on growth and development that we draw upon, but this is mostly developed at the national level, such as the one on poverty or middle income traps or convergence. So our contributions as we see it is to conceptualize and construct a measure that really is specific for the regional scale and in particular the European regional scale. What is the measure? How do we measure this development trap? We consider three main ingredients, if you like, which proxy or capture three key correlated dimensions of growth performance. Firstly, we consider income per capita, indeed sort of synthetic measure of overall welfare for a region's residents, to which we add a measure of productivity, here proxied by gross value added per worker, and then we consider performance of labor markets in terms of employment to population ratio. And for each of these measures, we consider growth rates, which we benchmark with respect to own performance of the region itself over a previous period. In other words, did the region do better than itself in the past? Did it accelerate in terms of growth, or did it decelerate? Or we consider the national or the European benchmark over the same period. Did it do better than its national country peers or other European regions? And so this gives us a total of 9 acceleration of deviations, which we use to develop 2 slight variations, but of course very related versions of this index. One that effectively considers the proportion of positive deviations we observe out of all the deviations that we measure. And a second variant that's richer, but potentially sensitive to outliers, which considers the mean deviation across all these 9 ones that we observe, which we then standardize for comparison purposes. I won't describe it in detail, but here I sort of I mapped out the specific index components for the regions that we will be discussing later in the case studies, and it's a useful way, I think, to sort of get a sense of what's underlying this index. But I can come back to this in case of questions. Again, for the sake of time, I don't want to dwell on it for too long. But what is indeed useful is to look at the geography of these development traps that we measure. And it's also a way to illustrate one very, very useful application of this index. So here I'm mapping on the left-hand side average values of the index over the 2001 to 2015 period, with darker shades of blue denoting regions that are, according to this measure, more likely or indeed in a development trap. So you do observe quite a bit of clustering with some countries such as Italy or France displaying a greater tendency to show higher index values, but also this is true for some other parts of Southern Europe, for instance, some parts of Greece or Spain. But what's also true is that there's quite a bit of granular variation even within each country. Consider France, for instance. Paris stands out as an outlier in this context. There's also a lot of variation in Germany or inside Spain and Portugal in the Iberian Peninsula. Another way to think about this is that if we just focus on regions that, according to this measure, we might reasonably conclude to be, let's say, at risk or indeed development trapped, we can recode these and draw them in different colors depending on their initial levels of development to try to get a sense of sort of these different growth trajectories. And so in blue here, we see regions that end up in a development trap coming from higher levels of initial incomes. A lot of regions in France, for instance, but also in the northern parts of Italy. In red, instead, we map regions that approach a development trap from below, as we discussed in the report, namely regions that were initially at lower levels of development and then grew and then plateaued and stagnated. And other regions in yellow here that sort of hover at middle income levels, that is just below European average, and cannot seem to get the growth engine started. We can also use this index to get a sense of what these regions look like on average by taking here to illustrate conditional averages of selected variables. Here are a few interesting ones that I consider, conditioning on whether or not a region is displays high levels of development trap index or low ones. And so we observe, for instance, that development trapped regions tend to have an older population, tend to have lower levels of education, as denoted here by a higher share of only primary educational attainment. They tend to be suburban, lower access by railway, but also in terms of sort of growth performance and other variables, we see that they tend to be, for instance, less innovative fewer patents being created. But also, for instance, industry growth is zero, if not even negative, compared to positive growth in not development trapped regions. And they also show higher dependency ratios. All right, but so having illustrated this, I think it's useful to sort of sum up how we think of this DT index as a potential tool for policy, and indeed as a way of as a diagnostic tool for identifying regions that are trapped. We think it has several advantages for policymakers, not just at the regional level, but also at the European and national levels. In that it offers a comprehensive and coherent framework for performing a comparative analysis of trends across different regions. And the index is flexible in that it can be broken down easily into its different components, either by considering the different geographical benchmarks or the different variables that underlie it, or by considering different time periods. As I said, this is available on a yearly basis. This is also another advantage, that it really is a dynamic index, which by being observed yearly can trace out complicated development trajectories, partly also because we are agnostic in terms of initial income or development levels that regions sort of end up trapped from. Having said that, there are some caveats when it comes to engaging with this index and interpreting it. And this is due to some inherent limitations to what we can do given the data we have, but also with respect to how the index is constructed. This should be kept in mind. Firstly, in terms of interpretation, as I said, we assess performance in relative terms. So this is benchmark dependent. It's not an absolute assessment. So a region will do better in terms of an index as long as it does better relative to itself in the past, or its peers in the country it belongs to, or sort of the overall European trend. And also reality overall is complex. So we cannot expect one summary measure to always get it right for each data point. And this is true for statistical reasons, for instance, because there's a lot of heterogeneity within each region that's defined by spatial boundaries. And so we're not able to capture that granular variation because we only observe aggregate data. And so the index itself is sensitive to how these boundaries are defined. And also, as I mentioned, this is available on a yearly basis, and so it's potentially exposed to fluctuations. And we're therefore cautious in terms of extrapolating from past trends. So all in all, this to say that it's always very important to complement the index with knowledge of the local context and experience, as we indeed intend to do with this workshop and with the case studies in the report that we wrote. So to conclude, where do we see this going and what are future directions for research and policy? On our side, we keep being in touch with peers and practitioners and policymakers, take on board feedback, and keep thinking about enhancing and refining the index, for instance, by adopting a more granular scale if data becomes available. But there's more work to do in terms of learning and validating the index, notably improving the characterization of what these trapped regions look like. What are systematic features associated with development traps, and what are socioeconomic implications of being trapped, such as, a potential geography of discontent arising from this. And finally, for policymakers, a very useful tool, we believe, for targeting and communicating the fact that perhaps it's useful to acknowledge that regional development is complex. And there are some limitations in the traditional rich core versus poor periphery narrative. And so adding trapped regions to the policy portfolio can send an important signal, also with an eye to be ex ante aware of potential issues, as opposed to just taking ex post action. And with that, thanks for the attention, and I'm happy to leave the floor to further discussion.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Perfect timing. And now I pass the floor to Spomenka for Adriatic Croatia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me on board. I will try to be as short or as punctual as my colleagues, Andreas, who actually made an excellent introduction to what I was going to say on Adriatic Croatia, as it looks from the study, but as it looks today, it is, I would say, an excellent example, or it is a right example to do a study on how the development is ongoing and how the development or development traps could be identified and then targeted with the right policies. As a little bit of a background, nothing more than it was said already in your study, but the NUTS2 region of Adriatic Croatia is one of the 4 such regions or 4 NUTS2 regions in Croatia. It is very heterogeneous, and I do agree, as I said, with Andreas, that it has to be looked from all different aspects, because within the region, within one country, there are different regions, but within each region you have again to keep certain flexibility to adjust the policies to target the each region specificities. For that purpose, as you all might know, Croatia entered EU in 2013. Now we are celebrating 10 years of membership. And I think these 10 years, last 10 years of our development were pretty much marked with significant changes. Yet, not as significant as they could have been, since many other things happened, especially in the last few years, starting with pandemic, then 2 devastating earthquakes hitting the Croatia, not Adriatic region, but central Croatia and its capital, and then all the consequences on the recent development in Ukraine and the Russian aggression on Ukraine, with the regional value chains that had been broken at many levels, that had really influenced a lot on our development in general. However, there are certain, again, specificities in Adriatic region, which again I find in the study and are excellently targeted when saying that such regions as, for example, our Adriatic Croatia has started its development with focusing on tourism after the homeland war and independence, and having no industrial base to be focusing on the tourism was something that was the first type answer for the development and production of income. And there we are, or here we are now with being rightly, I would say, classified in the development trap, since the type of tourism that was as a first response to what happened after the war was that one that resulted in a mass tourism, and not all the regions in Adriatic Croatia itself had rightly recognized or timely recognized potential traps of this type of tourism. However, things are changing, and the national, I would say, policy is changing and is currently being redirected to target even Adriatic Croatia as one of the regions where specific tourism management policy is needed, so that we try to diverse it and diverge it from mass tourism, from service providing, and as a consequence, low income level and everything that goes along with it. However, other types of policies, regional development policy and the Ministry of Regional Development, of course, with all other ministries, is focused on trying to introduce, I I would say, different types of investments, different types of policies, creating a ground for what is to bring something else, more added value to what the development based on such service providing hospitality incomes is, which is introducing regional development based on investment in innovations, based on investment in education, based on a lot of I would say new policy niches which are being targeted and focused down there in cooperation, of course, with the counterparts from Adriatic Croatia, in order to not only to keep the trends going, since we do have quite, I would say, positive trends, even in the last few years, despite all the outside effects that influence those. However, we would like those to turn more rapidly and to actually go faster in catching up the rest of the development countries in Europe or developed regions of our neighboring countries, as for example, some of them in Italy. On the other hand, if you compare data within the Adriatic region, so you look at the coastal part of the region and compare it with the island part of the region, and you look at the very specific and very basic, even though only available data, as for example, what are the results of investments in the last years? For example, in 2021, we see that within the Adriatic region and within the rest of Croatia, we have a loss in the number of inhabitants, whereas in islands, which are, I would say, faced with double development challenges or multiple development challenges within the region of Adriatic Croatia, that drop in number of population is much lower than in the rest of Croatia and in the rest of the coastal mainland part of the Adriatic region. If you compare it in absolute numbers, just to be completely clear, there is only 150,000 people living on all islands. So for them, drop in 3.2% is high. However, if you compare that one with the drop in the rest of Croatia or in the Adriatic region, which goes all down to almost 10%, it's obviously there are results and indicators that some of the policies that had been implemented or introduced for islands so far are getting results, and we should definitely continue the same way. We do hope, therefore, that the EU allocation of EU funds, which we have programmed for the next programming period, for the island specifically, will help that region go faster and catching up with other development indicators as the rest of the Croatia. And just to conclude, for the development stage in Croatia, we look at it like first financial perspective since we entered the EU, the first 10 years in which we have used significant amount of EU funds. We have invest a lot in public investment. We do hope we have also learned all that we had to learn while going through the experiences of first perspective, and we do hope that this next one, which we are entering right now, is going to be even more productive in terms of producing better not only outputs but impact on our development indicators. On the other hand, we have to say that there was a significant drop in economic indicators, whether we talk about GDP per capita or we talk about the gross added value per capita. However, things are changing, indicators are changing, and even in comparing with the results in your study, things are going up. We are catching up but it will take a lot. It will take a lot of efforts, a lot of energy to continue that trends, if not even upgrade them to a higher speed. I don't have my experience or my impressions or my saying for this conference on the development traps of such a region as Adriatic coastal region with all its heterogeneities as our Adriatic Croatia has are not much different from what has been concluded in the study, since, how shall I say, it looks as we were developing, getting into traps, getting out of those, and trying to reach its a positive trend. We're acting as described in the studies. Whether this could have been done differently, I guess yes. We could have done better, yes. However, as I repeat again, if you look at the indicators right now, if you look at the data right now, things are changing for positive. I am looking here on data for Adriatic Croatia on GDP per capita from comparison between 2011 and 2018, which is the latest year I have data, and your data are for 2015, and there are significant growth. Significant growth even within the region of Adriatic Croatia. I have to point out that, for example, Dubrovnik-Neretva County, with the high level of tourism, with the existing capacities and all its positive trends, is, I would say, outstanding compared to the others, whereas Ličko-Senjska County, which is also within Adriatic region but is scarcely populated, it has its development, I would say, challenges still to face on its task for all of us. Of course, it is much lower, and the difference between the two within one region is really high. And that's, I think, our primary task, to try to alleviate the differences within the region, and then the whole region with the rest of the regions in Croatia, and I would say even rest of the comparable regions in the neighboring country, because Dalmatian Croatia, with all its specificities, we have to compare with others similar, at least geographically, in other parts of Mediterranean, for example, to start with, because if you compare it with other regions within Croatia, you might get misled and get different data. Even though, if we compare it with other regions in Croatia, with all its current data and current incomes and current inputs and current outputs, that is a level of economic activity that it has right now, it is performing quite well compared to the others. However, with changes that are needed, we will, I guess, manage to avoid development trap or stagnation, because that's really necessary. Otherwise, with all its natural amenities and potential, it might stay at that level, which we, of course, want to avoid. I think my time is out, and I will stop here.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Very interesting. Always, I mean, this within region differences. So this is something that we are going to pick up for sure later on. And now we have Gianfranco on Abruzzo. Gianfranco, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Simona. Now we cross the sea. We go from Croatia to Abruzzo. Then we cross the Adriatic Sea. And we discuss the question, is Abruzzo in a development trap? This is my 10 minutes about, and I will start from the conclusion of the study performed by Iappadre and Mariani, Their conclusions are basically three. There was a real miracle in the development of Abruzzo between the 1960s and the 1990s due to regional development policies, favorable geographical position, and industrialization. Number two, it stopped in the early 1990s. Abruzzo reached the peak of 92% of the Italian average and then slipped back. And in this century, the performance was with some positive and some negative results. Number three, now the development process is trapped by the lack of development policy and by the pressure coming from international competition. This is the overall picture. The dotted blue line is the miracle, with Abruzzo catching up vis-a-vis the Italian average. Please keep in mind that Italy was growing very fast in that period, and Abruzzo was catching up, and then slipping back in the 1990s compared to Italy, and then recovering, but going down if compared to the European average. Industrialization was the key of this success. These are the share of the global value, the regional value added in those periods, and you see that now Abruzzo has a larger share of manufacturing over its economy, a larger share than Italy, that remains a powerful manufacturing country. So the presence of manufacturing in Abruzzo is still very significant. Why the end of convergence? Because this decline in labor productivity, and in my opinion, this decline in labor productivity is due basically to the lack of advanced services. Services are the largest part of Abruzzo's economy, as of all the other European regions' economies, but Abruzzo has no large cities, so the share of non-financial services and of business services of Abruzzo GDP is lower than the Italian average. So we have a manufacturing leg, but we miss the advanced services leg. The other reason is the decline not only of European development policies. The paper discusses the fact that Abruzzo went out of the so-called Objective 1 group in the 1990s, but the lack of national regional policies. In this picture, you see the expenditure generally speaking, for the development of lagging South as a percent of the Italian GDP, and you see that the national effort to develop the lagging region declined over time. Now, is Abruzzo in a development trap? Now, we have a problem here, because the question is the correct question, is Abruzzo in a development trap, or is Italy in a development trap? Because you can see that as Andreas already showed, the data are very bleak for all over the country. And starting by the end of the first decade of this century, the overall performance of the country was very bad compared to European average. So we have to discuss the crucial role of national conditions for regional development. But let's stick to the region. Is Abruzzo in a development trap? I have mixed answers. From a social point of view, my answer is no. Here I show a very simple index, a human development index, but Abruzzo is not performing bad at all if compared to the Italian average. The social climate in the region is good. So from a social point of view, it's much better than the rest of southern Italy. Are there prerequisites for economic development? Mixed answer. On the left, you see that the the level of education of people in Abruzzo is quite good. On the right side, you see that the effort in research and development and innovation in Abruzzo is quite low. So we have, with these two key indicators, different answers. I think that's very important to measure, also due to the demographic European transition, the movement of people, that is the migration. And in this respect, I think that Abruzzo is in a development trap, because it loses young graduates in favor of top-performing northern Italian region and in favor of foreign countries. So they are losing, there is a brain drain. And my last picture is Abruzzo in a development trap if we look at its economic structure? Now, a mixed answer. On the one side, Abruzzo remains a very important manufacturing region. You can see these numbers are the specialization index vis-a-vis Italy. The weight of the sector if compared to the overall weight of the Abruzzo economy. What do we see here? We see that Abruzzo is a very important industrial region. Food industry is important. Textiles and clothing remains important. Transport equipments is very important, but they are internal combustion engines motor vehicles. So on the right, I'm showing a picture from The Economist showing the changes that we all know in the car industry. So being specialized in internal combustion engines, cars and motorcycles is a positive feature of the regional economic structure or not? Open question. On the other, while Abruzzo is not at all specialized in mechanical engineering, that is the strength of the northern Italian regions, capital equipment. As far as services are concerned, I show again that the lack of large cities means that in the Abruzzo's economy, all the employment in more important service industries is quite low. This is value added, but it is the same in terms of employment. If you see all the numbers concerning those services are lower than the Italian average, and Italy as a whole is not scoring very well. So 10 minutes, but open question. Is Abruzzo in a development trap? Let's discuss it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, I have to say that, you know, your stay is Abruzzo or Italy as a whole. That is actually quite worrying. But we go back to that because it's also very interesting, the comparison across the Adriatic, actually, in this case. So, I mean, now, Markus, last but not least, that we will move in Northern Europe with the South Sweden.
Yes, we make a quite big jump from the Adriatic to the north. And thank you for having me. And I'm very glad to provide some reflections on the south of Sweden. And I simply ask me the following question: in what way is the south of Sweden in a development trap? And in the report, there were some points mentioned, like the productivity is a concern, the integration of migrants, disparities between places. But also it was mentioned that there is a high knowledge intensity, a diverse economy, and it's growing. And I take up these points. And I think it's important that we have overall the perspective of development in the longer term, because in the 80s and 90s, Malmö was really in a lock-in. It was really in a development trap. In the lower picture, you see this crane of a shipyard, which was dismantled in 2002, transported to South Korea. And now Malmö is a knowledge economy. So there was quite a radical transformation. And I think this is a background that we should keep in mind. But one point that was mentioned was there was a concern about the development of GDP per capita. And so I thought I'd just take the latest figures and do a rank. How do the regions in southern Sweden compare to other regions in Sweden? And there we see that Skåne, which is the much larger region, is performing average. And this is a bit surprising because in southern Sweden, there's one of the main urban areas in the Nordic, in Sweden. And so you would expect it to perform better. So in that sense, it speaks to the report. But then, as Spomenka already mentioned, the heterogeneity within regions is quite important. And if we look to the labor market, Malmö, Lund, Helsingborg, which is also very close to Copenhagen, 1 hour by train, is really growing very fast, and much faster than the region of Skåne on average, and much faster than Sweden on average. What you might see here also is, if you look at Malmö, it had a very bad performance, growth performance in terms of employment in the 90s. And this really speaks also to the lock-in or development trap that I mentioned before in the 90s related to the strong industrial structure. If you look at the education, we see on the right-hand side comparison of different labor markets, the urban labor markets. In Sweden, the yellow line is Stockholm, and Stockholm is always different than the other regions. That's maybe the capital kind of bonus. But what we see is that Malmö has closed the gap a little bit, and which is related to the building up of the Malmö University. And it looks basically similar with the doctoral education. It's also slightly closing the gap to Stockholm, and Lund is kind of sticking out here as university town. And then you could, of course, ask, okay, it is a knowledge economy now, the southern Sweden, but how knowledge intensive is the knowledge economy? And here, if you look at this graph, you see different sectors. The blue bars are the labor market Malmö Lund. And here we'll see that in many sectors, it is maybe comparable to Stockholm, or even better, like in media, telecom, business services, even in headquarter activities. And the biggest difference is really in finance, which is maybe not surprising. Bit surprising is transport, but this is a bit a longer story, so I cut this short. If you look at entrepreneurial activities, again, Stockholm is sticking out, but the region is performing quite well. And what is particularly interesting is if you look at the average growth of startups relative to all firms, then you will see that Malmö, which is the blue bar in the middle, is actually performing better. So the startups in Malmö are growing more than other startups in other places, even compared to Stockholm Solna. And what is also quite interesting is that Malmö Lund labor market seems to gain more and more interest, or becomes more attractive for headquarter activities. So this in a way speaks that this labor market, Lund, Malmö, Helsingborg, is maybe not really in a development trap, but so where does it come from? And I looked at these graphs which show the development trap index from the report. And there we see that it peaks at the beginning, 95, beginning of the 90s. And this could relate to the very much old industrial region structure of Malmö, the shipbuilding transformation. So that kind of resonates with me. Then it kind of declined, and then it peaked again around 2008. And this reminded me about a study that we did, and there Olofström was standing out. Olofström is a small municipality in southern Sweden. It is a manufacturing based. It is dominated by Volvo as a large employer. Volvo in 2008 is due to the aftermath of the financial crisis, cut jobs. They lost about 1,000 jobs there. This graph to the right side basically shows the growth performance of the labor market considering all other structural factors. And it is basically much less than you could expect. And this is about the time when also the development trap index peaks. So if I would, maybe if you would ask me to find, the reasons for this peak, I would probably look at Olofström and other more kind of manufacturing places in the global south, in southern Sweden, and see whether they have a similar pattern if they're similarly affected by the aftermath of the financial crisis. So then there was one point that was mentioned also in the report. This was the integration in the labor market. And it is, of course, evident that non-Swedish born have a higher difficulty to enter the labor market. But what is maybe equally interesting, I think, is whether as an educated non-national, you get an adequate job. There we find that there's a huge structural differences. So if you're a non-national, you will find it, what this graph shows is basically that you find it about it will be double as difficult for you as a non-national to find a job that is adequate for your education. But this is really a structural problem in the labor market, which is quite the same in all labor markets in Sweden, and it is quite stable over time, and it is decreasing. The only difference here is in Lund, but this is because Lund is basically a university town. If you would ask me how does it look for women, for instance, women have 10% disadvantage. We have not calculated how it is for female non-nationals, but you can imagine that it would be much worse. So briefly, as a summary, I think the overall average productivity or growth figures, you could expect them to be better, considering that there are the three main urban areas in Sweden and that southern Sweden has one of these three urban areas. Then if you look at the by far largest labor market in southern Sweden, Malmö, Lund, Helsingborg, also very close to Copenhagen, then you will find that it is knowledge intensive, it is growing fast, it's diverse, it's innovative. So I would say it's very difficult to consider this labor market to be trapped. But then what was also mentioned previously, labor markets differ significantly. And this average is then may conflate thriving regions with stagnating or shrinking regions in the periphery. And here it is what we know in Sweden, that the small municipalities, they are shrinking. And there are in southern Sweden, you have quite many. It's also parts of it are very rural with small municipalities. And then you have some more industrial regions like Olofström that I mentioned. So I think overall, I feel it needs a more fine-grained analysis in terms of spatial sensitivity. And Andreas mentioned also the MAUP. So how are the boundaries drawn? But I think also that it needs a bit of a reflection about the dynamic perspective. And I think Andreas also mentioned that. But if I just take Olofström as an example again, yes, they had these difficulties in 2008. But then if you look a few years further on, they performed better than you could expect. So what can we learn for the future by looking in the past? So I think this is also a very big question. Thank you very much.
Wonderful presentation, also yours, Markus. I mean, you raised important points. And if I can just say a few important points here are obviously the intra-regional differences, the MAUP, but more generally what scale of precisely also administrative or let's say policy region you consider. We have different performances. It was mentioned also by Spomenka. The region that is on the coast differ very much on the islands. The same story for on the indicators of Gianfranco for Abruzzo, and definitely now Malmö, Lund compared to the rest. So actually I see Andreas ready for a question. So Andreas, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Simona, and thank you very much for everyone for wonderful presentations. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave early, but I think you've raised quite a few interesting points. I think Simona highlighted the most important thing is this idea that within, let's say, regions that have been identified as development trap regions, you have significant variation with areas actually quite dynamic and other areas suffering behind. But my question is mainly, or well, it's to all, but mainly to Spomenka, Gianfranco, and Markus, and goes in two directions. The first one is, we've been looking at the economic consequences, but what are the social consequences of having at least part of your regions in a trap, and not just social, but also the political consequences. We have seen that in Skåne and in Abruzzo, there has been a rise of anti-system voting of parties at both extremes of the political spectrum. It's a bit less the case in Adriatic Croatia, but what are the risks and what are the problems? And then the second issue is what can be done in order to spring out of this trap, specifically in each of your regions. Thank you.
Who wants to go first? Maybe we start in the reverse order now. Markus, you go first.
Yeah, that's good. So I don't have so much time to think, so I'll probably say many stupid things. So first of all, political consequences. I don't have the longitudinal perspective now and can link it to the places where it mattered. I know that there are some pockets of anti-establishment voting, even in the Lund Malmö labor markets, and they are quite historically grounded. And also you find it in some of the other places where you have historically quite a lot of non-establishment voting. I have not really, as you have done, Andreas, in some of your work, linked it to the development performance at the very local level, because I think that would be interesting to really look at the labor market and see how do they vote in the labor market and link it directly to the performance that people actually experience by losing jobs or so. So I think that would be quite interesting. What can be done, and there I think the recommendations are quite different for the more dynamic regions, because maybe I think Malmö Lund is not really the place that you would address with the kind of development trap report, but then there are other places, and these I would say are those that are traditional manufacturing regions, and there are some that came out of this kind of development trap. There's one, for instance, close to Olofström, Karlshamn. They were like Malmö, like Olofström. At some point, they were kind of sticking on to the old job. They wanted to have real jobs. They had the offer that Lund University would do a campus there, but they said, no, thanks, we want real jobs. And then here, 10 years later, they realized, okay, maybe it's good to move towards knowledge-intense economy. And then they got the campus. But it kind of required them to change the mindset that, okay, we need to do things differently. And the same is in Olofström. When they had the crisis, they started to rethink, is it good to be reliant on one big company, or do we need to try to diversify, for instance, our client base, maybe our regional economy? Do we need to coordinate a little bit and not only focus on the one single big employer? Because in many of the smaller regions that have some kind of economic activity, it's often fewer big employers, and municipalities are often very blind to say, okay, I can't even think if they start reducing jobs. So I think one needs to work with this a bit more actively. I think the integration of labor markets is quite important. So the labor markets have become bigger and bigger in southern Sweden, but the ability to commute to the more dynamic labor market regions is, I think, very important. Yeah, I think I leave it at there. I could talk a bit more, but I don't want to take too much time for everybody.
Thank you very much. Now, Gianfranco, what do you see the political, social risks?
Sure.
What can be done?
Now, question number one, is those development data creating a social and political turmoil in Abruzzo? My answer would be not so much, because they are still people used to fight for development. while immediately north of Abruzzo, in the region of Marche, in the region of Umbria, where the GDP per capita was higher and people got used to a better life, there has been a stronger effect because people were used to be in the developed part of Europe, and they find themselves in still fighting for development. So the traditional center-left government in Umbria and Marche was thrown away several years ago and substituted by a new wave of voting for the right part of the political parties. I think that these effects of disappointment are stronger in higher income development trapped regions than in lower income developed trapped regions. Question number 2, what can we do? What can they do? My answer is very simple, maybe too simple, and is go back to national development policy, because Abruzzo is in a country, Italy, that stopped for 15 years to design and perform development policies. I mean, public investment, industrial policies, research policies, education policies. They just managed the day-by-day politics. And in this framework, it's very difficult to face these problems of development overall in the country, and especially in regions that are halfway between as Abruzzo. It is not so much a matter of region, of policies made by the regional authorities. In my opinion, it's much more a matter of, in the case of Italy, of policies made by the national authorities. Of course, regional authorities are important, but they have to work in a framework of national policies that was missing for a long. We will see in the next year with the next generation, but this is in my maybe too simple answer.
No, I think it's actually a very interesting point, this of the national level between the regional and the European. Spomenka.
Well, thank you. I can't say more before I absolutely agree with what Gianfranco said and what Markus said. Even though Croatian region is rather different in its complexity, Adriatic region, than the two previously mentioned. But if you look within the region, the biggest town of Adriatic region is Split, which used to be a strong industry center, which has, of course, gone away. Let's put it simple. Still, it does perform a bit better, even though, as I say, the influence of tourism and developing a tourism in creating I would say, creating a better living standard out of tourism, which then tend to be a simpler or lower level tourism or moderate type of tourism, has kept it at a bit better level than the rest of the region. But then if you look at other smaller towns or other region, northern part of Adriatic region, as for example, Istria, or which can be compared with its big cities with the industrial background with Split whatsoever. However, all the indicators, all the data shows that Istria has, even though it lost its industrial base, it's one of the transition areas which is considered by the Just Transition Fund. Today, you can imagine what kind of loss it undergo or it underwent in the past. It is performing a bit better with the tourism because I would say it earlier understood what the real tourism is and what do they have, working on combining the rural and the urban tourism, investing in higher quality capacities, and then getting a better class or higher class of tourists, and having a higher productivity overall, if you talk about that. Comparing to, for example, Rijeka, which used to be strong industrial town, there I would say their waking up and their move ahead is just starting recently, and could have been much better considering what they used to have. If I talk about social component, I here talk about Croatia, which by all data that we have is a rapidly aging country. I think that's the best, I would say, indicator of what is happening at the social level. With the brain drain, with the lack of secondary and tertiary level of education, which means then you are missing higher, better paid jobs or better paid possibilities. Universities are improving and growing strongly lately. We do hope that, as I said in my first intervention, after the first financial perspective, with the real support of EU funds, with the real consolidation, as Gianfranco said, even at the national level, don't forget that we just recently, or 2 years ago, introduced the National Development Strategy till 2030 as an umbrella document, strategic document, which will leave the flexibility to all regions to have their own regional development plans, but is somehow defining where do we want to go and how do we want to go. With the support of international, I would say, international leaders as a World Bank experts, we did produce the document. We did conclude that we need to have something like that. We can't be going with over 2,000 different types of strategies that at some point existed in Croatia, because it's just a mess. I do appreciate the bottom-up approach. I do appreciate local initiatives, regional initiatives. It's all fine. I work for regional development. However, without national document that would define where do we want to go and where do we want to be as a country in 10 years, I think all the efforts previously invested could have performed better. Let me put it that way. As a political consequences, well, let me be kind of in between, as Gianfranco would say. I'm not sure if I know all the details well to be able to say how it is being displayed throughout the region, even though we do have changes from one party ruling the region to another, with the nationalistic wings being getting stronger. But having in mind what we have gone through, still it's quite recently, I think things are going to improve with the remaining or the indicators we talked before, and these things politically will go into a direction that will develop, will change, will evaluate or evolve, but it will not stop the development of the country, which I think is the most important after all. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Now we have Markus, but I have also a question from a member of the public. So Markus, I think you want to come on the same points, because I have an interesting question for all of you. Please, Markus.
Yeah, thank you. It was just a follow-up on what Gianfranco and Spomenka were saying about the national level. And in Sweden, there was quite some national support for regional development policy previously. Also, Vinnova, the Swedish Innovation Agency, had something called Vinvext, which also supported regional development efforts. But this has completely disappeared. So Vinnova has no particular spatial sensitive regional policy tool for regional innovation policy. And the national government has basically no tools or instruments, but for shrinking, small pot for shrinking regions. That's completely disappeared. And it's only the regional, so the European regional policies that matter in Sweden. And that is quite surprising. And it's also a bit problematic because, you know, the richer regions, they don't get so much money. So they do the smart specialization strategies, but there are not really any muscles behind it. So that is really, I would say, problematic from a Swedish regional development perspective.
No, thank you very much. This is really a very, very crucial point for debates. The national level shrinking has been shrunk everywhere, and also a lot of regional tools like regional development agencies that, I mean, in my 20 years in the UK, I've seen scrapping these agencies with the now this sort of farcic attempt to leveling up that is not there because there are no institutions able to address that. However, I want now to introduce another question that is coming from Maurizio Giannone. He asks, which role are playing the urban spaces? So cities are increasing or not the inequalities? Now let's start from Gianfranco, Spomenka, and Markus.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are, because the advanced services are much more concentrated than manufacturing, and they are concentrated in urban areas. So as far as the Italian and the European economy increases its in the European economy, it increases the role of services, urban areas are becoming more important. Especially after the relative decline of manufacturing due to international competitions, this is the key of the last 20 years. Now, as Andres wrote several times, there is nothing deterministic in this. How much, which cities are developing, how much they are developing, we will see. I always remember this paper regarding Madrid and Barcelona. So I cannot say why this is happening in some cities and not happening in other cities, but I do say that this is happening. This is happening, and it's increasing the regional divides. In Italy, it's absolutely clear. The stronger part of Italy, that is the northeast of Italy, is so strong because it has a large manufacturing base and perform very well performing cities such as Milan and Bologna, while the other parts of the country are not performing well because they lack cities of significant size, as the case of Abruzzo, or because they do not have so much performing cities. So I think that this issue is absolutely crucial. It's a matter of structural transformation. Manufacturing remains very important, but being a manufacturing region alone is not enough. You need medium-sized or large-sized cities performing well in advanced services. And I think that this is a key issue for interpreting the transformation of European regions and for designing policies as well.
Thank you very much. Spomenka, on cities and...
Well, I can't agree more with what Gianfranco said. And in the case of Croatia, but then again, in the case of Adriatic Croatia too, we have detected that as a potential field for intervention, if we speak for a national level and the designing of our national regional policy. So it decided for the next financial perspective to allocate more than prescribed by the regulation to integrated territorial investment for urban development. So it's a mechanism that the regional development funds allows to invest in cities, in urban development, transforming urban centers as how shall I say, key players or key development front runners. Force or insisting on defining the urban development area, which then again comprises of smaller towns, cities, or even villages, which are concentrated around the cities. We have increased the scope, the scale of this instrument. We do have now are putting right now efforts in determining how do we, from a national level, help cities with the methodological tools to design their development policy in a sense that not all the European investments stay within the cities as urban centers, because within the city, within the urban center, which once has lost its industrial power, you have the space, you have the place to develop something else in the region around, so not to concentrate the population and its force within the urban areas. I think, and I cannot agree more once again with what Gianfranco said, urban cities without the good combination and balance between the services and the industry, which is the smart industry, or within the smart specialization strategies of the country, we cannot expect to have, how shall I say, equal or similar or equalized regional development, because with the opportunities offered by urban centers with regard to employment, with regard to education, with regard to social services and social life and urban life, whatever it offers, with the good combination with what rural areas are offering, we will not achieve multiple effects and added value that we do hope to achieve with the combination of policies. Don't forget just one more thing, that most of Croatia is actually a rural area. So urban cities should definitely be the ones, the key points of a speedy investment in order to catch up with the development percentages of the neighboring or European countries. And we do have this score that says that we have jumped for 61% to 61 to 72 or 62 to 71, don't take me for granted, of average EU development, which is not the indicator per se. It does not grant anything, but it is an illustration or orientation point that this policy mix should be pursued, and additional point of investment in regional value chains and defining for each of the regions, including in the Adriatic Croatia, which are the value added or which are the development chains in which they should be investing and specializing, therefore having their plans directed that way. I think we are on a way to avoid staying in a development trap, for which I have to be honest and say, as it looks now, we are. But with the tendency and with the different mix of different policies, I do certainly hope that things will transfer and flip soon, and that investment in education, which is happening largely on a country level scale, will get us to where southern Sweden region is with the knowledge intense development base.
Markus.
Yes, thank you. Good question. And inequality, I guess you can have within regions and between. And let me say a few words about inequality between. But first of all, there's no doubt that in the last, decades, many more jobs were created in the urban areas, while the small municipalities have lost jobs. So there's no doubt about that. But then, as Spomenka and Gianfranco said, manufacturing is quite important in Sweden outside the urban areas. It provides quite good jobs because manufacturing in Sweden is automated, so it is quite high-paid jobs. And often firms would like to recruit people, but they don't get the people. So they could grow more, but people cannot attract them to these places. What is interesting in Sweden is actually that if you look at the wage inequality, you will find that if you do an index of wages and how they have developed over the last 30 years, it is really surprising that the wage growth is identical in all regions in Sweden, regardless whether it's urban or rural. The wage levels are different, but the wage growth is identical. It's one line for all regions, really surprising. And that speaks in a way potentially for good labor matching, but it could also speak to the labor market institutions, which are quite strong in Sweden. So in that sense, it's quite interesting. And the fourth point, however, is something which is a new development. This is a strong reindustrialization in the northern part of Sweden. This is no urban areas, and they build industry there in big numbers with large job creation. The question is how to get people there. But it's a complete shift, I think, in the weight of the economic structure in Sweden.
Thank you very much. A lot of these very big, important themes are emerging from this discussion. I mean, this manufacturing base that, however, I mean, has to be combined with agglomeration economies on the one hand and advanced services on the other hand. Also because we know that it's difficult in some cases, growing number of cases in Europe, to bring back what has gone. And I mean, I'm not a believer of big reshoring tendencies, actually. So we have to explore further models. I would like to close because it's been extremely interesting and very fruitful in terms of the ideas that we have to explore further, precisely the role of the cities. I would say medium and large, but as we know from other worlds, the US or even London or Paris, I mean, don't forget that in the big, large cities, the metropolis, by definition, there is an horrendous inequality that is becoming really evident, right? I mean, so that is also something to take into account. But for sure, Europe has more scope for medium large cities that have this capacity of aggregation and advanced services and some mix of manufacturing and services that nowadays is difficult to establish the boundaries. Andreas, I would like you to say a word also on all these insights that we had from our three experts in order to close the workshop.
Yeah, very gladly. Just one quick comment actually on the last question to add with sort of the evidence from our index. I'd like to stress that we do see it in the data as well, that regions that tend to be trapped or display higher values of this index are also more suburban. And then on that note, also a reflection on the fact that the role of cities might be changing as well. There was just an op-ed on the New York Times yesterday, I think, with Edward Glaser at Harvard and Cagliari at MIT, emphasizing how cities are becoming, I think they were mentioning half of the office spaces are still empty after the pandemic. And so perhaps the shock we've observed, and it's an open question, will it change the role of cities entirely? Will it be the death of distance that everybody's been talking about so far, or will the cities become, as they call them, the new playgrounds? But also, what does this mean for regions that are still developing or that are caught in traps? Can this open up new opportunities? And something else that I wanted to go back to, which seems to have been mentioned by many of you, is the role of national policies and how to distinguish also the national contribution leading into the development trap from the regional one, for instance, what Gianfranco was saying. I think that's very, very important. And the open question is, to me, is like, can we? And is it possible to even disentangle it from the European level? So we do our best with our index, but the regions are related to each other. So intervening in one region inevitably also affects other regions. And so I guess this really does speak for the need of coordination, not just at the national level, but perhaps even at the European level. So I think maybe wary of time, it's best I close it here, but I think these are all open questions that will be worth looking at in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, really, Spomenka, Gianfranco, Markus, Andreas, because it's been extremely interesting, really thought-provoking. Next time in person, right? We will organize an event for the Cañada Blanch LSE in person for sure on this topic.
But in Croatia, not in London.
No, in Croatia, for sure.
You're mostly welcome. You're mostly welcome.
We will come there.
We can do it even on one of the islands.
Fantastic. Spomenka, we'll remember. We'll get back to you on this.
Don't worry. I'll be glad together with my colleagues. What I just wanted to say, just one sentence on national policies that are to be considered to be having I would say, an important role in leading out of the development traps of regions. For that, it does take time, but we do have to keep that in mind, because regions by itself, on their own, without an outside coordination, even though it might sound now as out of a national authority speaking, would not be able to do on their own.
Fantastic. Yes, absolutely.
They'll probably kill me for this, but I had to say it. No. This is the right forum. So have a good evening all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye, Victor.
See you in Dubrovnik.